my pleasure to welcome you to Hawthorn University, and I want to thank you so much for joining us as we continue our Holistic Health and Nutrition webinars for 2021. Today we get to welcome Beth O'Hara, Functional Naturopath, presenting on Precision Mold Detoxification for those with sensitivities and mast cell activation syndrome. Beth's going to provide us with an overview of Mast Cell 360's approach to precision mycotoxin detoxification, and she'll also help us learn about mycotoxin detoxification approaches for those that are sensitive and have MCAS patients. Beth's also going to share the latest research on targeted mycotoxin binders, and then the research on phase 2 pathways and the associated mycotoxins, also research on the supportive interventions for phase 2 pathways. And finally, Beth will review a case study to demonstrate the application of this process, which is going to be so helpful. Beth, I just want to acknowledge what a fantastic topic this is, and I thank you so much for bringing it to Hawthorn.
Oh, thank you so much, Paula. I'm delighted to be back. This is just my passion and my mission. So any chance I can share it and help support other practitioners to help these people who keep falling through the cracks and can't find help.
It's so fantastic, and I want to let people know, speaking of slipping through the cracks, that you presented for us previously on November 17th in 2020. You had a really exciting presentation on slipping through the cracks, mast cell activation. So I encourage anybody that wants to know more about this to review it. You'll find it in archived webinars on our website. And for those who don't have the pleasure of knowing Beth yet, she's the founder and owner of Mast Cell 360, a functional naturopathy practice designed to look at the factors surrounding health conditions, be it genetic, epigenetic, biochemical, physiological, environmental, and emotional. Beth's subspecialties are mold toxicity and genetic analysis in the area of mast cell activation and histamine intolerance. She designed Mast Cell 360 to be the kind of practice she wished she had existed when she had severely ill with mast cell activation syndrome, as well as histamine intolerance, neural inflammation, Lyme, mold toxicity, fibromyalgia, and chronic fatigue. Oh my goodness, Beth. So her mission today is to be a guide and light for others with mast cell activation syndrome, histamine intolerance, and these related conditions in their healing journeys. Through her Mast Cell 360 root cause process, Beth discovers the unique root causes that affect each of the client's health issues, being whether those are building personalized, effective roadmaps for healing. She holds a doctorate in functional naturopathy, a master's degree in marriage and family therapy, and a bachelor's degree in physiological psychology. She's certified in functional genomic analysis and is a research advisor for Nutrigenetic Research Institute. She presents at functional medicine conferences on mast cell activation syndrome and histamine intolerance, as well as the use of genetics and biochemistry in addressing chronic health conditions. We're really honored to have such an expert presenting on this. Thank you, Beth. And for all of you, we don't want you to miss anything. This presentation is being recorded and it'll be available for replay on our website in just a few days. We'll likely go 75 minutes for this presentation, and we'll follow it with your questions and then Beth's answers. So write your questions or comments in the webinar question panel at any time, and we'll certainly respond to them after the presentation. We often post to the webinar chat box too during the webinar when there's something relevant to share, so keep your eyes on that. And finally, there's a survey to fill out when the webinar ends, and we certainly appreciate your taking the time for that. I'm your host, Paula Bartholomew, a founder of Hawthorn, and I'm here with James Bernard and Helly behind the scenes engineering. So now with all that said, it's time for Beth O'Hara. It's a pleasure to have you, Beth. I'm eager to learn more of your expertise and really support all of us to understand and actually then be able to incorporate this. So thank you so much for all of this.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to just pop on camera real quick. And I just wanted to say before I go into the slides that most of us come into natural health because of something that sparks us, because of some kind of our own experience or an experience of someone that we really care about and that we've witnessed really struggling. And that's how I came into this as well. And so this was my own journey, and I was horribly severely ill. I stopped counting at 75 practitioners, And there is a piece of my health that I don't often share, but I wanted to share just a little bit tonight. And so when I was a child, we moved into an old farmhouse and didn't know. I thought we were living Laura Ingalls Wilder, and it was an adventure. But there was a lot of mold in that home, toxic mold. Back then, toxic mold wasn't a big issue unless you lived in a historic home, and that was a over 100-year-old house. And I was growing up playing in the fields and rolling in the grass and all kinds of tick bites, and had Lyme, Bartonella, and Babesia. It took decades for people to figure out. But another element was that I was kicked in the head by a horse when I was 9, and I'm in my 40s now. And just a few weeks ago, finally got an MRI that revealed the extent of the damage in my spine. And this is something where structural pieces, I really want to start incorporating. I've been incorporating for a long time, but at even more depth is what's going on structurally. Because if we have things going on structurally, they're putting pressure on nerves, or, we found out that I have cerebral spinal fluid backup from a Chiari malformation. That was, and the various other things here. Well, anytime you got pressure on the brain, you got pressure on the nerves, it's going to affect your mast cells, it's going to affect the immune system because of that psycho-neuro-endocrino-immunological axis. So I just wanted to come on and share that, and that the people that we're talking about here, the super sensitive people, are truly the people that there aren't a lot of practitioners who are taking the time and the patience to help these people. And there's a massive need. So I'm hoping, if the only thing you take away from tonight is that there is hope for these people. I see them get better and get their lives back all the time. And, there was a period of my life where I was bedridden and I couldn't work, and I had to turn down medical school, and I just didn't know what I was going to do with my life. And just having a few people believe that I could get better made a huge difference. So I'm hoping that you all can also bring some of those glimmers of hope to the people that are suffering the most. And for most people, if they truly want to get well, and you don't have personality disorder, I believe they can get well. And so I want to show you some ways tonight that we can do that. And let me hop in here because I've got a lot to share with you. I also
Beth, I
have a
want to thank
lot.
you for being so vulnerable of what you just shared.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's a
Oh,
great opening.
yeah. Thank you. And can you see my slides, Paula?
Yes, good.
Okay, great. And so there's a lot of reference slides at the end. So I hope you'll download these slides and that you will look through, because I gave you a ton of resources. And this really is my mission, to help this population, because this population is not a bunch of sick people. This population are our CEOs, our business leaders, are just top-notch moms and top-notch dads, and the kids that are going to grow up to be scientists and engineers and environmentalists. And so when we help these people, we're not just helping somebody get their health back, we're helping them get their lives back so that they can go on and they can live their mission in the world. And so as we do that, we can really change the world this way. And that's what I'm on fire about. So just a quick reminder, always disclaimer I have to do, that this is for information, educational purposes. We're not here to treat, diagnose, cure, prevent illness, and not here to replace medical advice. It is copywritten, so if you would like to use this other than personal study, I request that you reach out for permission. This is our outline. So we want to go through this big picture of working with sensitive people and people with mast cell activation syndrome, an overview of what the research is showing us with, we'll do an overview of mycotoxin detoxification, and then targeted mycotoxin binders. I'm going to also take you through, so this is up to date from the literature review from some research teams I've been on. Latest research on what the research literature is showing us about phase 2 pathways and associated mycotoxins. And if you haven't seen this, this is a game changer. Both of these binder areas and phase 2 pathways in the world of mycotoxin detox. We're going to look at some of these supportive interventions for phase 2, some mycotoxin detox approaches for mast cell and sensitive patients, and we're going to do a case study. So that's a lot. So hold on to your hat. Here we go. And I use this slide a lot. I use this in my last presentation here, and that's because when people have mold toxicity, this is a perfect storm for developing these super sensitivities where people are struggling to take supplements, they're struggling to take medications. Seems like nothing works. The other reason I'm so passionate about this is a lot of times these patients get labeled as crazy. Now, there are some people that do have personality disorders and they may have trauma that truly is a barrier. They're not as many as the people that get labeled at all. And many times these patients feel like this. This is how I felt, just hanging on by a thread by the end of the cliff, and person after person after person telling me that I was the most complex case they'd ever seen, the most ill person they'd ever seen, no idea how to help me. Those were the compassionate practitioners. The ones who told me that it was in my head, I wanted to be sick, I was crazy, were the ones who were locked into their own ego, and that was very damaging. And most of the people that I see that come into the practice have medical trauma from these situations. We want to be very, very careful about blaming our clients or our patients for their illness. There are some people who want to be sick, but there aren't that many. And these people actually have to go very, very slowly. And with those medical traumas, they need time to build trust with their practitioner. And we have to remember that too, that there's always, with people who have seen a dozen practitioners, they've had things fail. I've had people who are super sensitive and have ozone pushed on them, IV glutathione, which would have worked fine in somebody who wasn't sensitive, but it was a horrible nightmare. And the healing process also involves healing that practitioner-client relationship as well. So let's start with a research review here with mycotoxins. I'm going to do a little bit more on this than in the last talk. But mycotoxins are one of the things that significantly underlie mast cell activation syndrome and underlie these sensitivities. And I'm going to be building the case for that here. When we have mycotoxins, they're going to disrupt the nervous system, the immune system, the endocrine system, the gut, you name it, it's going to get disrupted. And we are living in a truly epidemic of mold toxicity. It's a hidden epidemic. It is as significant as mast cell activation syndrome, and it is the #1 root cause that I see in our Mast Cell 360 clinic. And 95% of the people that come in the door have mold toxicity. It's very rare I see somebody without it. And so what are these mold toxins doing? And so this was a study, this was from 2016. This is looking at how Alternaria, this is a type of mold, exposure to that is causing mast cell activation, and particularly in the epithelial cells and the mucosa. So you're going to get experiences of people who have mouth burning. That's a very common mast cell symptom, is mouth burning, and GI distress. But when we have those, we have to go deeper than, well, that's the mast cell activation. Well, why are the mast cells activated? And these mold toxins are often one of the reasons, not always the only reason, but if you've got sensitive people, if you've got mast cell activation, please look for mold. And so here, T2 toxins, this is going back to 1987, we knew that T2 toxins were activating and degranulating mast cells. And this was a rat study. There was another study that you can pull from 1983 showing significant mast cell activation cardiovascular tissue in mice. It's by the same authors. Then we have this study, 2018 here, looking at how the mast cells become activated by different types of fungal species through what's called the toll-like receptor. This is a type of receptor on the surface of the mast cells. They're specifically there to respond to fungal species, and they're going to create, it's going to trigger the creation of pro-inflammatory cytokines. Think about that, the cytokine storms that are now common household knowledge. Cytokines are a common household name, never thought that would happen. And the mast cells are highly involved here. So then we have the impact of the fungal species on the immune responses. And this is a diagram that's coming from a 2018 study as well. It's just showing you those toll-like receptors and that the mast cells are going to be stimulated through that and start releasing cytokines such as interleukin-1. And there's a number of other cytokines that get released. Now, when we're talking about mast cells, it's very critical that we remember that mast cells are not acting in isolation. And this was looking at a bigger picture of the immune response and cytokines. This was from 2007, so this has even expanded since then. But I like this diagram because it shows how much all these different types of immune cells are using these cytokines to signal to the mast cells. The mast cells are also signaling out to these other cells as well, and there's a complex interplay going on here. So when we see issues in any of these other cells, any of these cells actually, we need to think about the whole. It's easy to talk about the mast cells, and the mast cells are often a type of orchestrator of the immune response, but we want to remember they're not the only cell here. Now, this is absolutely key, this diagram. So this was 2019, mast cells and neuroimmune interactions. And this, what you're seeing here in the center, this is a mast cell. You have these little pockets that are the granules that hold the mediators. And then we have our nerve endings. There are mast cells at every nerve ending in the body. And there are mast cells in the limbic system in the brain. So I'm going to tie this together. This is very critical, that these mast cells are releasing these inflammatory mediators and different types of signaling mediators as well. They're not all inflammatory, but here's a group of the ones that were being studied here, including histamine, cytokines, VIP, and so on. And they're signaling to the nerve endings. And then the nerve endings are releasing neurotransmitters, neuropeptides that are signaling to the mast cells. Mast cells releasing mediators, including neuropeptides, back to the neuronal endings. And so we get these feedback cycles that are happening. Mold toxins, as we're going to start stepping into, greatly disrupt the nervous system as well as the mast cells. And when you have disruption on both sides, you're getting one of those perfect storms. Now, when we have people who are super sensitive and they can't take supplements, they can't take medications, because of this psycho-neuro-endocrino-immunological axis, we can actually start to make shifts in the immune response in the mast cell activity by working through the nervous system. And this is key if you have anyone with sensitivity. And in fact, most people with mold toxicity need to do some nervous system calming. And we're going to talk about some specific steps there. So moving into this neurotoxicity, this is from back at 2011, looking at T2 toxins, ochre toxins, trichothecees, fumonisin B1. These are all types of mycotoxins known to have the potential to induce neurotoxicity in rodent models. And then in 2018, this was co-authored by Beth O'Hara, and he's one of the top mast cell researchers along with Lawrence Afrin. And they were looking at how, this was a review article demonstrating how mast cells have a major role in the effect of mycotoxins on the body, that the mycotoxins are really implicated in this major inflammatory cytokine release that's happening from the mast cells, and then the effects on these types of neuropsychiatric symptoms. Then we have, this is 2020. This was an article, another review article by Beth O'Hara establishing this connection between mast cells, psychological stress, and mast cell mediators. I put this in there because we can't underestimate the psycho-neuro-immunological axis for anyone with sensitivities with mast cell activation and mold toxicity. It's a huge missing piece. So with this psycho-neuro-immunological connection, and the word endocrino often gets dropped, but it's meant to be there, just gets shortened. We need to remember that we get these interactions between stressors, neurotransmitter changes. It might be from mycotoxins or other pathogens like Lyme. We're going to have genetic, or sorry, not genetic. We're going to have polyvagal signaling changes, or you can think sympathetic, parasympathetic, whichever model you want to use. Mast cell and other immune changes, endocrine changes, HPA axis changes, autoimmunity, allergies, cancer changes in the cancer and immunosurveillance systems, cardiovascular systems, metabolic changes. Mycotoxins are highly carcinogenic, and I get more and more people in the practice who develop cancer while they're in the practice, while they're attempting to get these mycotoxins dealt with. We're at a race against time, but we cannot be aggressive. And it's a little bit of a tightrope, but if people have mycotoxins, we want those gone. We want them completely out of the body. There's not a level of mycotoxins that are truly safe, in my opinion, because of the cancer, because of the changes in this immunosurveillance and the risks for cancer. Doesn't mean that everybody with mycotoxins develops cancer. They don't. But if the genetic makeup is there, the other factors are there, then what you're doing is pouring gasoline onto a fire when you've got mycotoxins. So we want to be very mindful of how critical these are. The other thing is that we want to remember that many of our sensitive patients with mast cell activation syndrome had early childhood traumas. This is a great paper to pull in psychoneuroimmunology. This is from 2017, looking at the hidden wounds of childhood trauma and how that affects this HPA axis, the vagal nerve signaling, and so on. So often those traumas need to be addressed, not through repetitive talk therapy, though. That's been shown to perpetuate the trauma, because the nervous system doesn't know the difference between telling the story again and again and again and it actually happening, but through modalities like somatic releasing. So I'm going to touch again on cell danger response and how this plays in with sensitivities. So we have this whole cascade. If you want to really look at cell danger response, go into the work of Robert Navio, who developed this, and Neil Nathan does a wonderful job of distilling this down, and he's who I've learned this through. But we get these series of responses that happen in cell danger response, and if you just kind of start to look through here, you can go, oh, well, wow. See a lot of people with low vitamin D, they've got methylation issues, they're under or they're over-methylated, cell membranes, we can't get any nutrients in, they've got neuroinflammation. If you're running an organic acid test, they might have elevated kynurenic and quinolinic. They've got all these heavy metals. Well, the body's doing this intentionally. This is a protective mechanism, so we want to be thoughtful of if somebody's very sensitive. Now, again, this is all couched in terms of what we need to do for sensitivity. If you've got somebody who, you know, is a 25-year-old college athlete, they've got some mild mold toxicity, nothing seems to faze them, you don't have to worry about this too much. This is the sensitive people. So in those sensitive people, if we try to work against the cell danger response, we can start to see problems with things like phosphatidylcholine too early, methylation supports too early. Sometimes people have trouble with B6, it's P5P. That's a cofactor for an enzyme called histidine decarboxylase. It's how our bodies convert histidine to histamine. So it can increase that activity. For some, low carbs might be a problem. Intermittent fasting, low carb, fantastic. Some people can't do it. So if they tell you, I really crash and feel horrible on low carbs, there's a reason. Metal detox, we want to be very careful to leave those metals where they are until mold is addressed, unless it's very acute metal issue. Trying to get antimicrobials on board for the gut before the mold is addressed. This is going to be trying to do SIBO protocols. They usually don't work very well. If you've got a lot of mold there or H. pylori, you just can't get rid of these things. things like CoQ10 too early, these can work against cell danger response. So this is my model that I use with my clients and in teaching. They're really like, we have all of these issues, but we have mold toxicity. Mold's at the bottom of this tower. And so then we can just layer and layer and layer and layer and layer and layer on top of it. And then if you imagine that there is a nail that is holding each of these blocks down into that mold block there, you might be able to make a little shift on the SIBO end, but you're just going to be rotating that block around. You're not going to pull it out all the way. You might be able to help the adrenals, the HPA axis a little bit. Their sleep might start to improve if we're working all the way up here. But this is going to be a moving target. And this is just going to kind of rock back and forth. You're going to be chasing it and chasing it and chasing it. I've got people who have been trying to get rid of SIBO for 10 years. And they get a little better, then it comes back. They try something different, they get a little better. And they've spent, $50,000 on trying to get rid of SIBO. And so if we want to really bring this tower down and we have mold, and you can see that the lime is intentionally on top of the mold. If we have mold, we've got to pull this block out. Now, if you have acute Lyme, that's different. If somebody just got bitten by a tick a week ago and they've come down with symptoms, yeah, that needs to get addressed. But I'm talking here chronic Lyme that's been there for years, maybe decades. If we don't get the mold out, we're chasing our tails. And that's what happened in my case. And that's why, it took $250,000 to finally figure out that mold was at the root of all of this. And but I don't base it just on my case. I base it on the hundreds of clients who've come through, and also our practitioner groups and the mentorship groups, and that's what they're seeing as well. So we want to pull that out, and then we see what's left standing. So a lot of times some of these things will fall down, like neurological symptoms. You get the mold out, they may go away on their own. But the thyroid symptoms, these are just some examples. You could make 1,000 different variations of this, but maybe the thyroid issues are still there. You might have to go back and finish cleaning that up. There's a good percentage of the time the body, once mold is out, can address Lyme on its own and eradicate it without treatment. But sometimes it might still be over here in the tower, and you might have to do some Lyme cleanup as well. You just have to see, if to peel back the layers and see what's there. If mast cell activation's there, then well, what's still remaining, and so on. So we talked about this last time, but if mold toxicity isn't addressed, it's very hard to fix Epstein-Barr. It's very hard to heal from Lyme, from SIBO, or their gut imbalances, hormone imbalances, sleep issues, especially mast cell activation, histamine intolerance, salicylate issues. And what is a whole other topic is subclinical porphyria. So this is a new slide here. I'm talking to my clients about, we've got to build the foundation first, because they often come in and they're I've got them starting with the nervous system, I've got them starting with mast cell calming, and they come in, they're like, well, when are we going to deal with the Lyme? When are we going to get rid of my mast cell activation? When are we going to get rid of my SIBO? And I have to tell them, well, we're still building the foundation and framing the first floor. And if we try to go address SIBO right now, it's like trying to put shutters on when you don't even have the framing finished here. And so if you do that and you try to put those shutters up there, they're just going to fall down. So there's an order of operations that's really important. Now, I've learned that this is a lot of information very quickly, so I put some brain breaks in here, let your brain absorb a little bit. These are my two dogs. This is Nika, is the black one, and Kiko is the white one. All right, so let's start looking at what this precision detoxification looks like. So first, testing. With testing for mycotoxins, generally we're doing urine testing is my preferred. That's what my approach is built on. There is antibody testing that some people use, and there is a whole process of using MMP9, TGF-beta1, and some of those markers. They're not specific to mold. They're specific to inflammation, just in general. So I haven't found those to be something that has worked in my approach, although I know other people do use it, and there's lots of roads to Rome. But generally using urine testing from Great Plains and real time if we can get it. If we only have budget for one, we do Great Plains. I'm sorry, if we only have budget for one, I do real time. If we have budget for both, I get real time and Great Plains. Now, real time has a little more reliable with glutathione provocation. You want to go extremely slowly for sensitive people. Don't have them ever push through feeling worse because you can set off a flare, a cascade. Sauna or sweating is often used as a provocation for both Great Plains and real time, but many people with mast cell don't tolerate heat or sweating, may not be able to do a sauna, and they'll know. I just asked them, how do you do with sweating? And they'll be like, I do great, I feel great with sweating. Okay, wonderful, then we'll do some sweating provocation. But good 75% of the time, they're like, I feel really horrible if I get hot or I'm sweating, then we don't do it. Sometimes they can do about 20 minutes to 30 of a very gentle lymphatic drainage massage instead of sweating or glutathione. I do avoid any kind of deep tissue massage with hypermobility or EDS because it's going to destabilize the joints because the muscles are what's holding the joints together instead of the ligaments. So very sensitive patients may not be able to provoke, and that may be the case. Some people, lymphatic drainage massage may throw them over the edge. So we've got to look at how sensitive this person is, how fragile they are, and then look at the results based on that. And if they are super fragile, then you might only get a tiny little elevation. I've only had one test so far that came back unprovoked with nothing on it. This was somebody who was extremely ill and could not, the body could not allow the toxins to circulate in the bloodstream. Sometimes in those cases, I will get the antibody testing from places like my Myco lab. That's preferred antibody testing for my practice. So we have to address a little differently than the standard protocols because most detox protocols are way too aggressive for mast cell activation syndrome, especially for sensitivities. We have to address constipation first. So if they're constipated, I do not move them onto binders. We get the constipation handled. And then they do targeted, personalized binders based on their testing results. I don't ever have them push through a die-off or a Herx reaction. I have seen people bedridden from who are sensitive from being told to do that. We do start with microdosing, that means sprinkles. And we have to address the detox phases in the right order. So let's look at what those are. So first, we identify the mycotoxins through testing. We bring in nervous system supports. I'll give you some examples in a bit. I do have people do a low histamine, low lectin trial for 6 weeks in this population. And that's because their histamine buckets are usually overflowing. Lectins are mast cell triggers. And we see if they get any relief in 6 weeks. If they don't, then we abandon it. Now, if they are down to 10 foods, I don't mess with their foods. I'm not going to ask them to lower that if they're too limited. If they're children, then I ask their parents to clean up their diet some, and we swap foods. So we might swap high histamine strawberries for low histamine blueberries, but I don't ever take children down to fewer foods unless there's severe IgE allergies or something like that. Elimination is next. We have to address any constipation issues and make sure they're drinking enough water. It's amazing how many people know a lot about health and do not drink enough water. And then we support the mast cells, we do the targeted binders, and we support the needed detox pathways. Last come on board are the antimicrobials, and then biofilm busters if needed, and antifungals if needed. And so this is not always linear. It may be that we're working here and then we get this handled and then we start sprinkling in a little bit of binder, but then we realize we got to go back and do more with supporting the mast cell and the nervous system supports. We might get binders up to maybe a quarter of the target, and then we start to layer in a little antifungal. So there's also an art to this. This is my view of these kinds of cases. And I want to share this model that is a work in progress, but this is what I have right now. So I like this kind of 3D interconnected model. And so each of these little balls here represents a facet of their health, or a puzzle piece, if you want to think. But I like how it's all interconnected and everything connects to everything else. So often in these kinds of practices, we're thinking mycotoxins, we're thinking infections, we're thinking about structural issues, and hopefully we're thinking about how that's going to affect the craniosacral fluid hydrodynamics, which is very critical for nervous system. So hopefully we're thinking about limbic and vagal nerve. We might be thinking about the genetic epigenetic expression and what is underlying what's the blueprint that is being imprinted on with the issues that we have in the corners, the mycotoxins, the infections, and structural issues. How's that playing out? We want to think about what happened for this person developmentally. So this is where that childhood trauma came in and what was going on in that culture. So I have some people who they had very, very loving parents, and they grew up in a war zone in South Africa or in Romania. And so it doesn't matter how loving your parents are, that's traumatic. What happened in their history? What's going on in that psychoneuroendocrino-immunological axis? What's going on in their environment? We often think about EMFs, we think about mold. What else is going on? Do they have clean air? I like how Jill Carnahan says, clean food, clean air, clean water are our basics here. What else is going on in that environment? Are they living near transformers? Are they living near a factory that puts out toxic chemicals? I had somebody who worked so hard and got her house completely mold free. She was still really, really sick. Then she realized about a quarter of a mile from her was a factory that had shifted their manufacturing processes, and they were producing massive toxins, and the air near her home had become extraordinarily polluted where it hadn't been before. So chemical toxins and detox and nutrients, lymphatics, all these things that we often think about when we get functional training. But then what about this side? Trauma, including intergenerational. I have a woman who had no childhood trauma. She had a very loving family, but her mother had been highly traumatized, and her grandmother had been highly traumatized. And so even though her mother had really worked on herself and worked on healing the trauma, it affects there's studies showing it affects our mitochondria and our DNA. And so what happened there? And what's going on with the emotional, the mental, the spiritual, the energetic, the social, the bioelectric? We are bioelectric organisms. So what's going on with that signaling? And are we doing things? Cell danger response is kind of at the core of all this. Going back to the bioelectric, are we connecting in nature? Are we getting our feet on the ground? Are we grounding? Are we helping to reset that bioelectric? Are we in tune with the biorhythms? That's a lot of information to shift through, especially if you're trying to do a case review and sort all this together and put this in some way to organize. And it just, you look at it and it feels like you've got this in front of you. And so where do you start? What are the strings that you can start to unravel? Kind of like, if you're a woman, you can probably relate to making the mistake of, I moved last year. I thought that I wrapped my jewelry up nice and organized in some towels to keep it from tangling, but something happened in the box and it got all mixed together. And then I opened it up and I had about 30 chains that were completely knotted up. And that's, maddening to try to untangle. What's the first knot that you try to untie? And so if you have people with sensitivities, mast cell activation syndrome, you can't go wrong by starting with the nervous system. And here's why. And this is where I start everyone. So let's just first unpack the nervous system pieces that we want to look at here. So we've got the limbic system in the brain, and the limbic system is involved with the amygdala, which is part of our fear and emotion center. Evolutionarily, this is a very old center in the brain, and it includes the hippocampus, the thalamus, so areas that are involved in memory are right there. And the limbic system is this whole region. So we have our prefrontal cortex, there's our rational thought. But when we have trauma, when we have PTSD, when we have chronic stress ongoing, and when we have certain kinds of toxicities that cross the blood-brain barrier and affect that prefrontal cortex, the amygdala starts to take over. And this is where you get your highly amped up people. People are anxious all the time. Sometimes I can tell when I need to talk to somebody about testing their home for mold, I'm going to trigger their limbic system. And so I will set them up for it. And I'll say, you know, we need to talk about some things. I'm just going to put some pieces on the table. You don't have to do it all right now. We're going to get you a lot of support. But let's just start a dialogue here. But you might get a little scared. So I want you to keep breathing while we talk about this. We need to look at your home, and let's just see if there's mold in your home. And I'll say it that way, and I use a tone of my voice that has a hypnosis kind of quality to it. Not that I'm hypnotizing them, but I'm soothing them. And I will do that intentionally. And you might want to work on that, work on the quality of your voice, and make sure that your limbic system is in good shape, because the worst thing is when you have client in front of you whose limbic system is triggered and your limbic system is getting triggered because you don't know what to do for their limbic system, and then that's triggering their limbic system, and on and on. So you want to have some mechanisms to stay calm with people who have experienced these kinds of things and dealt with them. And I can tell you, when I was dealing with this, it meant the world to me if somebody could be calming and soothing, because my limbic system and my this whole nervous system were so amped up. I was exhausted. And it was a period of time before the big crash where I could not sit down. It was just, I couldn't sit. I had so much sympathetic activity. And so many people are dealing with that. So coming back to this, limbic system, a big key player in what's happening in the nervous system, sensitivities, and mast cells. So again, a reminder, we have mast cells here in the limbic system. If the limbic system is dialed up, if we had early childhood traumas and PTSD, particularly early childhood traumas will actually cause the amygdala to become overdeveloped. And so it'll be larger than people without early childhood trauma. And those people have to work more on changing these brain patterns. And it's very critical in healing for these complex cases. Then we have the vagal nerve. And the vagal nerve, this is an image that is showing, this came out from a journal article on review of vagal nerve stimulation as a therapeutic intervention. And so this is your, the vagal nerve here, what it's showing you is that it's coming out between the first cervical vertebrae, so your atlas, and your cranium. So it's at the craniocervical juncture. This vagal nerve comes down, it's the longest nerve in the body. It connects, I find this fascinating because of all my work in the Enneagram world and looking at psychosocial development. The vagal nerve is what connects the mind, the heart, and the gut. And those are our three ways of knowing. We live in a mind-centered culture, and I spent some time in Korea, and they call themselves a heart-centered culture. And they're cultures that are gut-centered cultures. But truly, we have all three ways of processing information. And the vagal nerve here also innervates everything in the torso: lungs, the diaphragm, the spleen, the liver, the stomach, the intestines. Anything in the torso, you name it, the vagal nerve is involved in innervating it. So I'll often see people with things like a lot of acid reflux, and I'll have them show me their profile, and they'll have a lot of curve in their back. Well, the diaphragm is getting pulled up, and if the diaphragm's pulled up, it's going to push the stomach up, and then the esophageal sphincter there at the top of the stomach can't close. So do vagal work and some diaphragm releasing, and it all starts to come down. Sometimes that's what I'm talking about on the structural side. We've got to look at the structural pieces, because if that's what's causing the acid reflux, no matter how many H2 blockers they take or other stuff for acid reflux, you're not going to get rid of it. So these mast cell nervous system links here. Mast cells, again, are found in the limbic system in the brain. They're found at all the nerve endings, and they even are involved in behavior, and particularly in shaping behavior in the areas of avoiding toxins and allergens and responding to stress. They're involved in anxiety, depression, and pain, as well as migraines. And a lot of migraines are actually subluxations of the upper cervical vertebrae. So these are some signs and symptoms of nervous system dysregulation. I'm going to leave this here for you. I taught a whole class in this, if you're interested in looking at it, called the Mast Cell Nervous System Reboot. And there's a little survey that you can take looking at how much the nervous system is dysregulated. But I run through this with all of my clients here. And you're welcome to use this list in your practice. So please use these information in your practice, just if you want to incorporate these into your own slides. I just ask that you talk to me. Okay, so signs and symptoms of nervous system dysregulation: light sensitivity, sound sensitivity, supplement medication reactions, history of Lyme or co-infections, chemical sensitivities, food reactions, mast activation syndrome, EMF sensitivities, mold sensitivities, issues with perfume or cologne, and autoimmunity. Now, connecting this in a bigger way, nervous system dysregulation is going to be involved in POTS, autoimmune disorders, gut motility issues, whether you're talking diarrhea or constipation, also problems with gastroparesis, with slow stomach emptying, neuropathies, tinnitus, complex regional pain syndrome, EDS, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, and IBS. If you're seeing these in your practice, these people need to work on their nervous system. If you're seeing those sensitivities, they need to work on the nervous system. So I have been figuring out how to rewire the nervous system for over 20 years. And what has really boiled down, and I learned a lot of this from Neil Nathan, so I have to give him credit here, is combining limbic system regulation and vagal nerve signaling, including looking at structural issues like the subluxations in the cervical vertebrae, particularly the upper cervical vertebrae. So these are just some of the things we use in the practice. So everyone has to pick one limbic system regulation program. Gupta program or DNRS are one of the very few out there that are targeted for the limbic system. And in the DNRS, it's called the rounds. In the Gupta program, it's called the 7-step brain retraining or the stop exercise. There's a lot of other stuff in those programs, but that's the meat that people need to do daily. And then they have to pick vagal nerve signaling. And I usually help them based on what symptoms they have, and we put it together based on their budget. But we have a safe and sound protocol practitioner on staff. She's a psychologist. She's certified in it. And we offer that to many of our clients. Brain Tap. Now, Brain Tap is a vagal program that uses different sounds in each ear. And it's these two work great if people don't have a lot of sound sensitivity, but if they have a lot of sound sensitivity, they may not be able to do it. So that's why you want to have a big toolkit to pick from on these vagal programs. These are much deeper than gargling or singing. Those are great and they can help and definitely have people do it, but I haven't seen it in this kind of level of sensitivity reboot somebody's nervous system on its own. I love frequency-specific microcurrent. There is a little bit of EMF on it, so for people who are severely EMF sensitive, they can't do that. Emotional freedom technique is a great technique, Qigong, and there are lots and lots of others. There's a book, I'm not sure why I didn't put it on the slide. It's called Accessing the Healing Power of the Vagal Nerve, and it has some physical exercises for releasing the muscles around the vagal nerve to help with these subluxations. And then, oh, here it is. It's right here. Stanley Rosenberg's vagal exercises. Upper cervical chiropractic, very gentle modalities. People do craniosacral therapy very gently. So these are some of the things. And if you really want more in depth, check out that course and go into a lot of information on these. So when people are really sensitive, they can't just jump into the deep end of the pool. And what I say is we've got people who are very, they have very hypervigilant and locked down nervous systems. And it's really this limbic vagal mast cell locking that happens. And so our mast cells, our vagal nerve, and our limbic system are all part of our surveillance system. And they work in tandem. So I like to think of them as these three guards locked arm in arm in front of the castle gate. And they're looking for danger. But if you've got guards at the castle gate and they've been on duty 24/7 for months and years on end, which is what happens in the kind of world we live in with all the toxicity and the mold issues that we see, then they're going to get wonky. Their signaling is going to get wonky. They're not going to recognize friend or foe anymore, and they're going to start shooting at the butterflies. So that's what happens for these people. When you have somebody who can't take the tiniest sprinkle of quercetin or a tiny sprinkle of charcoal and water, and I have them stir it and take a sip, that's a limbic vagal issue. There's not enough in there to really create much of a biochemical change. That's coming from that surveillance system, especially if it happens pretty quickly. That's a good clue. If they're getting reactions within 5 to 15 minutes, it's the surveillance limbic vagal mast cell. They need to back up and work on it. So people would just need to work a little slowly, dip a toe in the water here. They need to go very slow. And I'm going to leave these for you to read and pull the slides here. And I'm going to move us forward, one to a little brain break, because that's a lot. Some of this I've covered in the first talk, so I'll refer you back to the first talk. This is a little picture I made showing how pit bulls look like seals. So that's Kiko there. That's our little brain break. Okay, so let's get into this research here. And I want to start with targeted binders. So when we're introducing binders, we want to go very slowly with this population, and I like to use the word microdose. I give them the idea of a sprinkle. A sprinkle is like a little fairy dusting, like a few granules. And sometimes I've had people do one sprinkle every third day. I have some people who that doesn't work for them. And so they are putting one sprinkle in 4 to 6 ounces of water, stirring it and taking a sip every third day. That's how slow they're going. Because again, this nervous system is looking at it going, I don't know about that. So you want to go, well, let's just put a little toe in and see how it goes. And the nervous system might go, okay, maybe. And then you just do that for a couple weeks, let the limbic system, the vagal nerve, get used to it. And then you go a little bit more, and then you do 2 sprinkles. And so that's how we get things on board with these super sensitive people. Start one thing at a time. And I like to layer in the more gentle binders like charcoal and bentonite before we do things that are more broadly binding like chlorella and zeolites, or cholestyramine is a little hard in this population. So if you start getting increases in symptoms or these kinds of new symptoms like nausea, diarrhea, fatigue, muscle cramps, seizures, sleep disruptions, that you need to slow it down. So you want to stay under the threshold of increased symptoms or new symptoms with any binders. And if there are detox reactions, we just stop the binders, we go more slowly, we increase the nervous system and the mast cell supports, do lots of extra water, extra sleep. And I've got a lot of steps in the appendix, and I like to have people do some grounding if they can get outside comfortably, things like that. Not with the grounding blankets though. We have too many EMFs in our homes now, and they can become kind of antennas for moving the EMFs through the body, but actually get outside with bare feet. So this is our research team on the phase 2 detox, and this was done with Neil Nathan and Emily Gibler, colleagues of mine. Neil Nathan's my mentor, and Neil came up to Emily and I were presenting at a conference. She was presenting on a couple areas in mycotoxin detox, and I was presenting on a couple areas, and Neil got us together to get this much more orchestrated to where it is now. So we're very grateful for that. And then we have on the binder team, I always like to give credit. Joe Mather did the majority of this research along with Neil Nathan, and I get to tech myself on the end here because I did a small percentage, but most of this came on the binders from Joe Mather and Neil Nathan's work. All right, so let's look at what this is from the research literature. Now, there are lots of binders out there that are being used, like citrus pectin. And they may be just fine, but we don't have research literature on it. And this data has come from extensive research literature reviews, really combing everything we can get our hands on, going back decades. Much of the research is actually in agriculture because mycotoxins are a major issue in animal feed. But so then what we used were any human studies we could possibly find, or any animal studies that were close enough to human detoxification. So for the aflatoxins, and again, this is all in your slides, and in the appendix, you'll see this in different presentations and ways, depending on how you like to process. So these are the binders that are best known to bind aflatoxins in the literature. So charcoal, bentonite, chlorella, propylmanin, and zeolites. Chataglobacin, we don't know, but this is what it seems to be best binding. What we do know is propylmanin does bind it, and that's a product. Zymogen makes one. I'm blanking on the name. There's another one called Colon Protect, and that are propylmanin. It's a type of fiber that comes from konjac root. Iniatin B, the research literature shows that these are the targeted or the binders that we know work: charcoal, bentonite clay, chlorella, propylmanin. Gliotoxins, bentonite, NAC, propylmanin, Saccharomyces boulardii. What I want to point out is that you don't see charcoal here, you don't see Welchol, and you don't see cholestyramine. And so we want to make sure that we're really individualizing these binders. We can't use 1 or 2 binders for everything because these binders have different affinities for different toxins and materials. So then we have ochratoxin. And again, I would suggest, because this is a lot to take in, just print these out. I'm going to give you actually a table here in a moment that I use. I always have it available in my practice and go to it every day constantly to look these up because I don't have them memorized. But these are our best binders for ochratoxin. And then sterigmaticystin, charcoal and clay, chlorella, propylmanin, zeolites. Trichothecenes, charcoal, clay, chlorella, propylmanin. L-rhamnosus, and I'm still figuring out how to pronounce this species, so I'm not going to try. But the research literature showed that this probiotic also bound trichothecenes. Zearalenone, bentonite, propylmanin, Saccharomyces boulardii, zeolite, and rhamnosus. So here's the chart that you can print. And Scott Forsgren's on there as well because he actually did the chart creations. And so, I want to give him credit because he's where the name Precision Mycotoxin Detoxification came from for this. So print this or save this somewhere on your computer, have it available. This is what we know. as of this time in March of 2021, and I could tell you that this is going to shift. And when we look at it next year, there's going to be some additions, hopefully not subtractions, but it's already changed from when I did this last year at a conference last fall. So we've talked about binders, how to get them on board. These are the ones that are often better tolerated. Charcoal and bentonite are a little gentler. Saccharomyces, usually pretty tolerated, but sometimes if there's a lot of fungal allergy, that can be an issue. Propylmannan, glucomannan, those two, I don't use glucomannan very much anymore, except in constipation, but the propylmannan, sometimes a trouble in SIBO. And then better tolerated when added later, usually chlorella, Welchol, and zeolite go on a little better if you've got some of the others on board first. And then cholestyramine can be a little more difficult. Here's your brain break. That's a manta ray I got the privilege to swim with. I was swimming with whale sharks and some mantas came up. Okay, phase 2 pathways. This is what's so interesting. Amino acid conjugation is ochratoxin is conjugated by amino acids. And we're just going to go through the pathways. With sulfation, we have T2 toxin, and I always have trouble with this one too, deoxynivalenol. Glutathione, we often think of glutathione as a, should be conjugating all toxins. Does not in the mold toxin world. In the research literature, we could only validate that ochratoxin and aflatoxin B1 are conjugated by glutathione. That was a game changer for me. And so it might be for you. I just thought glutathione was our phase 2 go-to support, but it's not. And it just makes me think of, you know, really, how do we know what we think we know? And are we re-examining what we think we know about protocols? Are we going back, or are we just taking from rote? We don't want to just take from rote, because sometimes mistakes get made or assumptions get made that aren't true, and then they just get replicated. So I'd like to go back and challenge the assumptions and see, is this true? So methylation is involved with zearalenone, fusarium, alternaniol from alternaria, and then acetylation has a role here in these 4, varicurin A, reordin E. I'll leave those, they're hard to pronounce. This was the one that I did the acetylation research and the research for the next slide. This is what blew my mind. Glucuronidation is the primary phase 2 detox pathway for mycotoxins. And so I started getting into glucuronidation a couple years ago when I'm on a research board for Bob Miller's Nutrigenetic Research Institute. And at the conference, he wanted someone to present on each of these pathways. So I did glucuronidation. And I volunteered because I thought it was going to be easy, because there's not a lot written about it. And come to find out, it is one of the most important phase 2 detox pathways, period, because it processes the majority of mold toxins, majority of chemical toxins, medications, supplements, anything that's fat soluble, vitamin D, vitamin A, vitamin E, hormones, all have to get conjugated by glucuronidation. So here's your chart on this, what we have in the research literature. This is what we know. Yes, there are other mycotoxins than what we have in these charts. We don't know yet how they're conjugated, like aflatoxin B2. We just don't know. We have some guesses. And gliotoxin, we don't know what the phase 2 detox pathway is. But glucuronidation, by far a significant factor in mycotoxin detoxification. So here's your little brain break. Short brain break. This is Sanibel Island. It's this beautiful sunset there. So we have phase 2 pathway supports. Again, you can share, you can print these, but it'll take you through. Emily Givler made these colorful diagrams, by the way. She did a great job here. But generally with amino acids, we're supporting protein breakdown, generally just with dietary protein. You can do some amino acid supplementation. It can be hardness population. Sulfation, lots of things like animal proteins, Epsom salts, magnesium sulfate, sulfur vegetables. And then glutathione conjugation, lots of things. You probably learned a lot about glutathione conjugation supporting that pathway. Methylation supports. You want to do those later. Don't want to do methylation supports early on in this population, but those are the supports. The supports for acetylation include calcium pyruvate, acetylated supplements, B5 in the form of pantethine, and then glucuronidation. These are some supports here. So I'm going to move us to our case study here. And there are some things in the slides on biofilms and antifungals you can go to, but let's do this case study. So this was a very sensitive patient, and she had mold toxicity. She's 47. She'd had breast implant illness. She'd already had the explant. She had 3 kids she was raising. She lived in this beautiful historic home that had significant toxic mold, history of childhood sexual abuse, and a lot of limbic vagal dysregulation. She had a ton of symptoms, so I bolded some of them, but lots of sensitivities, twitching muscles. She got sick all the time. She had a lot of infections. She had SIBO. She had lightheadedness and vertigo, cognition issues. She'd get mouth sores, tinnitus, anxiety. Lightning bolt pains are a big, your light bulb should go off. If you see lightning bolt pains, mold toxicity is just about the only thing that causes that. Shooting pains, things like that. So when I see a case like this, we've got all these complexities. I go, okay, what happened in childhood? Where are the traumas? What's going on with the nervous system? What do we have for toxicity, particularly mold? So I'm going to call her Molly. That's not her real name, but Molly came in feeling like this. This was Molly's Great Plains mycotoxin test. Ochratoxin was elevated, showed a little mycophenolic acid. I don't pay any attention to the green and the red. In my opinion, it shouldn't be there. And these tests just show us what is excreted in the urine. They do not show the total body burden. So that's why I'm not comfortable in these cases going, oh, that mycophenolic is in the green range, it should be fine. Well, it's in the green range in the urine with what's being excreted, but what's the total body burden? And then here's her real-time mycotoxin. All 4 of them, this was before they added zearalenone, all 4 of those toxins came up as present. Again, if I see anything other than the tiniest hint, and most of these very sensitive people cannot excrete fully. And so you're usually going to get very low levels in the first level of testing. Oftentimes, everything on the real-time says not present. And it might be under the cutoff. I'm still going to go forward with mold toxins if we're seeing anything show up here in the sensitive population, not in a general, but sensitive. This is important. Her beta-glucuronidase was elevated, and that's important because when that is elevated, that gets elevated from pathogenic bacteria in the gut, that enzyme will cleave the glucuronide bond to anything that's gone through glucuronidation. So mold toxins got packaged up, conjugated by glucuronidation, and they hit that beta-glucuronidase in the gut. You just got rid of it. Now the mycotoxins are free floating, they're reabsorbing through the gut wall and so on. So here's how we went through. We started a low histamine, low lectin, and gluten-free diet. She was actually still eating some gluten. So because her gut was really bothering her, we went gluten-free. And we addressed some food antibodies because she had major food reactions. I don't always do food antibody testing unless there's a ton of food reactions and they're really struggling. We started some limbic and vagal supports there, set better boundaries with her family because she was running herself ragged. Switched her coffee to mold-free coffee. I don't do a whole lot with the mold-free diet. Most of my people can't eat things like cheese anyway, but coffee I do because the mold in coffee is extremely high. She had constipation, so we worked on it with magnesium oxide, digestive enzymes, and betaine HCl. We started some mast cell supports, periliseed, bakelin, vitamin C, diamine oxidase. We added some SPMs because she was able to tolerate that. That's immune modulating. So there's a few products out. D3 and K2, vitamin A acetate, cromolyn sodium, and ketotifen. She was moderately sensitive in this practice. She was not extremely sensitive. The periliseed extract, she did 30 minutes before meals, and as well as the cromolyn sodium, the ketotifen. Now, you probably recognize you don't see quercetin on here. Why is that? She had a lot of salicylate intolerance, so she couldn't tolerate it. And salicylates get detoxed through glucuronidation. So you'll see more salicylate intolerance and mold toxicity because of the load on that pathway. And she had to test her home for mold. When she moved out, remarkable improvement in her symptoms. That was a big clue. Very slowly started adding the targeted binders for her case. And then after the binders were on board, she got significant more improvement. And we started some lymph supports with castor oil packs. I don't often ask people to do coffee enemas. It's a big ask what I asked them to do anyway, but she wanted to do them. So the coffee has to be mold-free and organic. It's very critical. They cannot use Starbucks coffee. It needs to be mold-free and organic. And then we added some glucuronidation supports. We added a little glutathione. I go very, very lightly on that. And some Epsom salt foot sips. So we're supporting our phase 2 pathways. Then this was her repeat test. Ochratoxin was coming down. Real time, we had some good improvements with 2 of the mycotoxins coming down. Many times on the repeat testing, though, I see higher levels, and that can be either indicate they've got some new exposures and a new increased load, or it can mean that they are excreting better. They're improving their detoxification if you see higher levels. But then we adjusted her binders and we increased some bentonite, chlorella, and Saccharomyces boulardii based on what we saw in the tests, what was still elevated. She was still having headaches and motility issues, some nervous system symptoms and food reactions. So I sent her to an upper cervical chiropractor because of history of neck injuries. That really helped. She got flared trying to go back into her home during remediation. And when she was really flared, we had to back up her supplements, her detox supplements, and add more nervous system and mast cell support. Then after that flare calmed back down, we started her on some antimicrobials. We started with a tiny bit of Argentine 23, nanoparticle silver, slowly increased to 1 teaspoon a day. She had a lot of sinus colonization, so we added some saline and started rotating EDTA for biofilm and silver nasal spray. Slowly layered in some prescription antifungals that her local practitioner prescribed. And she added some biofilm because she had significant colonization. So Interface Plus, she had systemic colonization because of the breast implant illness. Took her 1.5 years to build this protocol up, but the symptoms at the time I made this slide, it resolved by 75%. And we'll keep going until 3 months after the mycotoxin testing is clear, then she'll go to a maintenance plan. So this is what we're doing with our clients, is we're helping them up the side of that cliff so they're not hanging off by themselves anymore. And if we can be patient with these sensitive patients and those with the mast cell activation syndrome, we can guide them out of that mycotoxin storm and here into smooth sailing. And as I said in the beginning, we're not just changing their health, we're changing lives for moms and dads and children and company owners and managers and employees, for healthcare workers, and that changes how they explore and how they show up for all the people in their lives. So here's how you can reach me. And thank you. I know I'm a little bit over, but thank you so much for your attention.
You're just fine, Beth. In fact, I'm wondering if you're willing to circle back just a little bit to the diet slides, just so that we can run through those a bit and see the food that you're recommending and not.
Oh, I'd be happy to. Yeah. So coming back to foods, I just have here, there's a lot of lists online for all kinds of things: histamine, salicylates, oxalates, and unfortunately, 95% of them have significant errors in them. It's very, very hard, first of all, to get those lists right. I've had my own struggles with making sure ours are error-free. And a lot of people are creating these lists by just copying other lists. They're copying mistakes, and those mistakes get copied. And we have things that aren't based in the research. So it's important to be based in the research. But these are some things that are often missed. I see that people are being told to buy the freshest meat at the meat counter, buy beef. Beef is aged. It's extremely high histamine if it's aged. You can get unaged beef. It's hard to find. Leftovers, very high histamine. Yogurt. Fish is one of the highest histamine. If it's fish at the meat counter, absolutely no go for people who have histamine intolerance. The only fish that people generally can get at a general grocery would be wild caught Alaskan salmon that's frozen, and then they have to flash thaw it because anything that still has the guts in it, the guts are full of bacteria. Bacteria produce histamine. And there's a place, Vital Choice, that has some other low histamine fish options. Cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, those are histamine liberators. And then lectins are going to include things like nightshades. This is that role of nightshades in inflammation. But lectins include cucumbers, squashes, most grains. But many of these you can actually pressure cook. You cannot pressure cook the lectins out of wheat. I'm not sure about corn, but you can pressure cook and lower it in rice and oats and squashes. Not so sure about eating pressure cooked cucumber, but it should help. With cucumber, I just peel and seed it. And so I don't have a lot of slides on the food, but that's what I did have. But what I like to do is just refer you over to our low histamine foods list. You're welcome to share this with your clients. And it's marked for histamines, lectins. It's got some generals on oxalates. Oxalates are a whole other animal, but metaphorically, but it is marked for that. And then we do have salicylate and FODMAP lists as well that we've done the absolute best we can to pull from the research literature.
Great, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
That helps. Nutritionist do, you bet does. So let's get to some questions if you're ready for that.
Perfect, I'm ready.
Right, first one about, I just wanted to mention, you're talking about the Gupta program, and we've got Ashtok Gupta coming on August 3rd. He's going to be addressing neuroplasticity and limbic system trauma.
That will be a do not miss. He's a great presenter.
Yeah, and very generous also to bring this to us. So I'm looking forward to that. One question about tinnitus and its effect from and with the nervous system. Are you saying that it's possible to clear it?
Yes, yeah, I've had a lot of people have improvement in tinnitus. I've had improvement in my own. It depends on what's causing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so tinnitus can be caused by nerve damage. If people have been listening to music way too high, or if they have had like an industry job where they had very high sounds all the time, but very loud sounds. But the mycotoxin-induced tinnitus absolutely is reversible in most cases, and particularly the vagal nerve work and then getting those mycotoxins out of the body so that they're not aggravating the nervous system, but also affecting the circulation in the ears, which is another factor in tinnitus.
Fabulous. Thank you. Question about aspergillus on the Great Plains oat test. Asking about aspergillus and what's a good binder for that?
Yes, so that's a good question. So think about not the species so much. So aspergillus will make aflatoxin, opotoxin, gliotoxin. Then there's some toxins like citrinin that are made by multiple molds. Many molds can make citrinin. But I'm just going to take us back to this chart, and this is what you'll get in the slides here. So then I would go to, well, which of the mycotoxins from Aspergillus are we dealing with? Is it ochratoxin? Is it gliotoxin? And then you can just look at the matrix there.
Nice. Well done. Very helpful.
Yeah, isn't that great? I love
Yeah, the
having.
little cheat sheet, right?
I'm so happy that Scott Forsgren put this layout together.
Yeah. So question is, do you have a mold detox protocol for non-sensitive patients that you'd be willing to share?
Well, this is it as well. I don't get those people because they don't, I have about 2 people who aren't sensitive, but it's basically, and I'm not sure why they're here, but it's basically the same thing here. Is just go through this process. You just don't have to go as slow, right? And so if you use this process, you're going to have really good results if you go in order. Because what we're doing here is we're laying the framework with supporting the nervous system and the mast cells. You just have them do less, and they can, if they're not sensitive at all, they can take a whole capsule of quercetin. That's not a problem.
Right.
They may not have to do a low histamine, low lectin trial. Definitely have to address constipation and water consumption. And then you're just opening up the pathways in order. So you want to have binders on board, so you have things to catch the toxins before you start liberating them from the tissues here with supporting the detox pathways. And then you have this going on so you can handle the toxins that are being released when you start killing things off with antifungals and liberating more things that are behind biofilm.
Beautiful, thank you. Next question is, at what point in the process of the protocol would you address recurring gut issues, such as something like H. pylori?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm going to bring us back to this one. So I've been talking with a colleague and good friend of mine, Steve Wright, and we're not so sure that H. pylori has to be addressed. I think first of all, it depends on how much H. pylori is there, right? Because we all have H. pylori, or most of us do. Is it problematic? The same with parasites, because there's a lot of studies that have come out that are fascinating about how there's many parasites like blastocystis that you want to leave alone because they're actually immune modulating. So we don't want to eradicate everything. We want to think about what the purpose is. And if a person's asymptomatic, I do not touch H. pylori. If they've got a tapeworm, or if they have severe giardia, I don't work with that, but I'm going to refer for that to get handled. But I've got a lot of people with parasites, and I've had a lot of people with SIBO, people with H. pylori who can't take any betaine HCl, and I tend to stay down here and work on that mold, but I will calm the mast cells. And then we often will have to do some adrenal support. We have to do some hormone balancing, some thyroid support to keep people comfortable. And then, but again, you're chasing a moving target. But typically, I don't really get a lot into the SIBO, or if H. pylori did have to be addressed until we're here. And then we see after the mold is out, what's left standing.
Okay. Do you think that using an infrared sauna, that it's an effective and gentle enough way for somebody experiencing mold toxicity and mast cell activation to detox with?
It's a really good question. And I have maybe 10% of people in the practice can tolerate sauna.
Because of heat?
Because it's both heat and wavelength. And what's interesting is people tend to tolerate certain wavelengths and not others. And I have not been able to piece together why or which wavelength. So I have people who are like, I've tried 10 saunas, but it's only this one I can do. So I don't have them do a lot of sauna unless they know they can handle it, and then they'll do it. But in a general practice, absolutely sauna, sauna, sauna. You get those binders on board, and then sauna is a great thing for health. If you can get the mast cell symptoms calm, people probably can then do sauna.
Yeah, I would think so. Okay, what's your opinion on supplements that state they're histamine blockers, such as supplements to take 15 minutes before eating to help the histamine reaction in the gut?
Well, I think it depends on which ones. I did do a supplement class if anybody's interested that gets a lot more in depth than we can talk about tonight. But I love doing perilla seed, quercetin 30 minutes before meals, diamine oxidase about 10 or 15 minutes before meals. You just get it ahead of the food and it'll calm, because we have massive amounts of mast cells in the GI tract. Calm that GI tract down, and then people, sometimes that'll help with the food reaction.
All right. Another one on supplements. If there's a certain formulation claiming to bind all of the mycotoxins and it's having rave reviews by the practitioner, but that's not really based on the research, what would you say about that?
Well, I think there are a lot of formulas out there, and we just know from the research literature there's no way to produce. You'd have to have a binder that had all of this in there to bind everything, and that doesn't exist right now. They may work. There's just not research on it, and that doesn't mean that they're wrong. I know people that get great results with citrus pectin. I know people that get results with cholestyramine, but literature only shows it only binds ochratoxin. I just am a person who likes to stay with what we know works, particularly with people who are really, really struggling. I don't want to guess with them. I don't want to experiment. If I have a general practice or have people who are a lot more sturdy and they occasionally come through, then I'll ask them, hey, you want to give this a shot? And, they'll be a good sport and we'll give it a go. I don't mind trying things on them, but I want to, with this population, I really want to feel solid in what I'm offering.
Yeah, me too. And, anybody that I've worked with that's been dealing with mold for an extended period of time has become that sensitive person. So,
yeah,
you're weakened by it on many levels, as you've adequately described here, Beth. All right. I'm sure. Is mycophenolic acid on the list? She didn't see it. I'm not certain which list. It's not this one.
Yeah, well, you're correct and astute to pick that out, that we don't have it on the binder list. We do have it here. It has been shown in the literature, and this is all in the references. So the reference slides give you all the literature on this. The mycophenolic acid does go through glucuronidation. It just tends to get handled. Let me just step back here. It does tend to get handled. I rarely see it as the only mycotoxin, and it typically gets handled as we're addressing the others. So probably charcoal and bentonite clay work. We just don't know.
Okay. All right. Same person's asking about your experience with humic acid and fulvic acid.
Yeah, they have a lot of research in binding things like glyphosate. And I like to use those when we have chemical toxins. I could not find anything on them in mycotoxins. It may exist, but we all spent over 6 months in our separate, in our individual literature research review areas, really combing literally hundreds and hundreds of things. If anybody has something we don't have represented, I'd love to see the studies, because it's hard to comb 10,000 studies. But the humic and fulvic, I do really, I was a bit of a skeptic. I'm always a skeptic naturally and initially, but I'm finding that it's really helping with those tight junctures in the gut too. I'm really interested in the liquid forms right now.
think I saved this question. I think it's such an important one. Um, if you end up drinking out of a moldy water bottle by accident for about a month and started to experience symptoms, would you go about the detoxification differently since you're not inhaling the mold?
That's a great question. And I have a related similar experience, which is I have twice now gotten mold contamination from one was a hydrogen water machine that wasn't sanitized when I sent it for repairs and it came back. And the other was my reverse osmosis filter failed, which is very rare
Mm-hmm.
for it to fail, and mine failed. And so I've had bacterial and mold colonization twice now from that. And I did the same thing that I do with all my clients. I tested my levels. I did the targeted binders. I worked on my GI. We didn't even talk about short chain fatty acids, but I did there's a really great supplement called Tributyrin X, and got the diarrhea calmed down, did the binders, and moved forward in the same way. Because you get mold colonization in the gut. You can get mold colonization in the sinuses. You can get mold colonization in any hollow space in the anywhere in the GI tract, in the vaginal cavity, in the bladder. I've seen it all of those places, in the ears.
Yeah. So I want to make a comment about plastic and mold and water standing. Sippy cups. I've pointed this out to parents so many times that the sippy part of the cup has mold. It can accumulate mold and you're unaware of it, and the baby's drinking out of that over and over again. But really any kind of plastic that's got water and for an extended period of time or used like a water bottle should be checked very
And
carefully.
wash. We want to wash all this stuff at least every 24 to 48 hours at a max, because and that's such a great point, Paula. And really, anytime you have water for more than 48 hours, you have mold growth. And if you have humidity, this is where anywhere coastal, anywhere along the Gulf Coast, Texas, California coast, Pacific Northwest, when I see those people come in, I know they have mold, because I haven't had a single person in those areas not have mold in their house. The only places I've had people not have mold in their house was occasionally New Mexico, Arizona, and the Panhandle, the north part of Texas where it's dry. But if you have humidity above 50%, you're going to have mold if you have it more than 48 hours, which is most places in the U.S.
Yeah. So you must be recommending testing of the homes.
Yes. Yeah. I've had people do a lot of different things. We've tried a lot of things. It's very hard to get a good mold inspector, but there are a handful of them. People usually end up wasting $1,000 to $2,000 and not getting what they need. So unless somebody is lucky enough to get one of the really good ones in, or they can afford the $5,000 inspectors who travel, I have them do old-fashioned mold plates and send them to immunolytics, and I have them do an ERMI, and that's where we start.
Okay. Good suggestion, Beth. Yeah.
Yeah.
Save the money. You're gonna use it. Okay. Just a couple of more quick questions. What about ingesting moldy foods like fruits? Can that have lasting effects?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I'm assuming, Paula, we have a mostly US based audience, or do we have an international audience?
I can't tell, where everybody's from, but I would say mostly US.
So in the more developed countries like the United States, in Western Europe, there are really good food testing standards. So we don't tend, now obviously, if you see fruit that has visible mold, don't eat it. If there's cheese and you eat cheese, if there's even a little spotted mold, don't eat it, because mold has hyphae that will extend out quite a considerable amount. And you've got a block of cheese, a little spot of mold, you've got hyphae through that whole mold, or that whole cheese. I used to have people work on that, but I asked them to do so much, and I was not seeing significant results except in significant mold allergy. There's really bad IgE mold allergy, then I'll have people do it. Otherwise, I wasn't getting the benefit. It wasn't, the ROI wasn't there except with coffee. So if people do drink coffee, I will ask them to switch if they're not on a mold-free organic coffee.
Do you have types of coffee, brands of coffee that you are recommending here that are mold-free? How would somebody know?
Purity is really, really good. They're my favorite because they're also organic. Bulletproof is really good. It's not organic, but it's very good. I know there's some others. Those are the two brands I know the most. And because I see people so sensitive, we just stick with Purity here.
Yeah, me too. Thank you. Last one, can mold cross the blood-brain barrier?
Yes, that's a great question. It crosses, mycotoxins can cross the blood-brain barrier, they can degrade the blood-brain barrier, and they cross the placenta, and they will pass through the breast milk. And I've had a number of children who were sick since birth. And I just had an adult man who's 32, and he's been sick since birth. And then mom happened to be in the room, and I asked her, have you had health issues? And she started explaining. It's like, that sounds pretty classic mold toxicity, I think, because they were worried about he contracted Lyme in utero, and like, we may have.
Yes.
I can't prove it, but I'm fairly confident you absorb mycotoxins.
Mm-hmm. All right.
And can I just add to that, Paula?
Sure.
If you have clients with mycotoxins and they want to have another child, and things happen, and I had somebody who tried really hard not to get pregnant. She's in a detox protocol, but if they can at all avoid getting pregnant while they have mycotoxins, that's the ideal. But because of that crossing, and I just see so many little kids who are 3 years old and covered head to toe in hives, and just miserable.
Yeah, and worse things too.
Yeah.
So one more question snuck in here, but I don't know if you can answer this. She works with an international clientele and so can't prescribe. How would you navigate getting them precision binders?
Well, we have an international clientele as well. We have for a few years. We just took a little break just because with all of the custom restrictions going on from COVID, it's been a nightmare trying to get things across the borders. But we often they can find a functional medicine practitioner locally for prescriptions, so we try to help them identify somebody. There's some places that are highly conservative, like the Netherlands, where they just don't have much functional medicine, but sometimes people can. And then there are some places like DSS Orders will ship internationally. In the UK, there's a good platform called Amrita. I'm looking for one for the EU, if anybody knows of one, because since Brexit, the shipping from Amrita from the UK across is very, very expensive. But we do that, and then they can also use FullScript or Wellevate and myus.com, or if you have staff, you can ship yourself, but that gets time consuming.
Thank you so much. Been a lot of questions about slides and if they'll be available. So I want to let everybody know right now that the webinar was recorded and it'll be available on Hawthorn's website under archived webinars in just a few days with the slides. That said, Beth has been very generous with this presentation and her slides and has mentioned several times that you can use your slides in your practice and your presentations and encourages it. But Beth, I think that you asked people to ask you for permission first. Is that correct?
If you want to use, please use this information in your practice. If you want to, you can send any of our links, our website to your patients. Very happy for any of the resources on the website to get shared. If you want to duplicate the slides into your own teaching or presentations, I just ask that you talk with us and give credit to our team here that has done the work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, everybody. We're going to wrap this up here, and I appreciate you going long, Beth, very much. I just want to make a comment about the fantastic references that are sprinkled throughout this, and all of the fantastic reference slides that you haven't even seen yet that you're going to get when you come to our website and look at this under archived webinars. It's just an excellent resources for our students, for our grads. And for those of you that are listening that aren't part of Hawthorn, you're witnessing the high-end presentations and the kind of information that our students learn at Hawthorn. So if you're interested in our programs, and check out our website. There's lots of things that might be just suitable for you. And I just have to say how delighted I am to have Beth O'Hara here and this presentation. I'm so honored to have such expertise and such a beautiful delivery, Beth. You're just so calm throughout it. And this is just important when you're talking to sensitive people.
Thank you so much, Paula. It's really a pleasure and an honor. And I just want to thank all of you for your interest in this. And it's not only important for them, it's healing for me that people take an interest in this. And, you know, it kind of makes that journey have some meaning and have been worth it. And I love what you're doing. Thank you for giving a platform for this kind of work to get out there.
Absolutely, it's so important. All right, everybody, there's a short survey to fill out after the webinar ends, and I just have to say how very helpful it is to have your feedback and any comments about this presentation or anything of the webinar series. So I appreciate you taking a few minutes for that. And just to let you know, we have an exciting year planned for our now once monthly Tuesday webinars. And coming up next on May 4th is Dr. Mary Kay Ross. She's an expert, and she's going to be presenting on the connection between Alzheimer's, mold, and mycotoxins. So it's a continuation of this conversation, and we'll keep you posted on more details for that. And our next All About Alumni graduate interview that I do will be Wednesday, May 5th at 12 noon Pacific time with Wendy Borden. She's going to be presenting on her postgraduate activities and accomplishments and her challenges too. So I'd say this is one to tune into for sure. And just to remind you that we've had many previous terrific grad interview presentations. So check those out in our archives to know what Hawthorn graduates are doing. The many ways they're using their education stuns me repeatedly. It's so varied and beautiful. So I hope we've inspired you to learn more about health and nutrition with all the webinars we've offered, and certainly this one. So check out our website for the programs and the courses that we offer. And with that, I'm going to say we're going to conclude the presentation. Thank you very much, James, Bernard, Nellie, and thank you again, Beth. Appreciate it so much. And to everybody, really, for sharing this educational experience with us. I want to wish you all the best of health. And I sure look forward to meeting you again when we're back here with our next webinar.